Welcome to the ninth grade experience. I'm your host, Chris Dutchko. As a teacher of freshmen and one of our freshman mentor committee faculty advisors, I spend a lot of my school day thinking about and helping students with the successful transition from middle school to the halls of Emmaus High School. The goal of this podcast is to give you the story of the ninth grade here at Emmaus High School through the people who live it daily, the students and staff. We will attempt to touch on the real issues and stories that ninth grade students face, ranging from academics to athletics, technical school, and just trying to find your way as one person in a community of approximately 2,700 students. We will also look to speak with some of the influential staff members who play a key part in a student's ninth grade year. It is the hope that future ninth grade students and their families can use the tips and insights provided here to begin making connections to their potential new school and learn more about the day-to-day lives of the students that they will one day become and realize from day one that ninth grade counts. You can learn more about this episode and all of the episodes of the ninth grade experience by following us on Twitter at EHSFMC or at Chris Stutchko, or following the hashtag EHS9counts, or our website, sites.google.com/eastpennsd.org/ninth grade experience. Before we jump into today's topic, let's thank our sponsor for this show, the East Penn Education Foundation. This podcast has been made possible through a $1,000 grant awarded to teachers like me each year who are attempting to do unique projects in the area of science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. The foundation supports programs that put learning in motion by giving students the tools they need to think actively in a complex and changing world. You can follow them on Facebook at EPSD Education Foundation, on Twitter at EPSD EdFound, or on Instagram at EPSD Ed Foundation. Now on to the show.
Let's get started.
Okay, so welcome to this special episode of the ninth grade experience podcast. Usually we have students or staff from our high school here, but on a whim, I found Mr. Brian Koppelman here, who is on his Twitter account saying that he would have anybody and record anybody with a podcast. So I took him up on his offer and I reached out to him, and thankfully today he has decided that he would love to do it. So thank you, Brian, for reaching out. I don't know if hopefully everyone's familiar with your work, but you are currently the co-writer and showrunner of Billions, which is going into season 5 this year. You were a co-writer of the movie Rounders and Ocean's 13, and you've been on lots of different podcasts and radio shows as well too. So thanks a lot for joining us today.
Chris, it's my pleasure, man. Really happy to be here. Happy to talk to you. Happy to talk to the students.
So I figured the first question has to be this. So here I am, little podcaster, teacher in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, reaches out to Hollywood writer, busy guy. Why take the time to come onto a podcast like this today?
Well, I think anytime you can do a small thing that adds a little bit of value to someone else's life, day experience, it's useful to do it. It's useful to do it for them, but it's also useful to do for you, because when you're doing something that in some way, some small way even, makes someone else's life a tiny bit easier, during the time that's happening, you're not able to be worrying about your own problems. You're not able to be focused on the fact that you're at home also during this quarantine. That's the amazing thing about contribution. People often talk about what it means to give back, and sometimes people are afraid to point out that it feels really good to give back. It makes you feel better. Your own endorphins fire when you're helping someone else out. And so that's one thing. Another thing is, as a podcaster, I was aware that there were going to be podcasters all around the country who were wondering where they were going to get guests from during this time of quarantine. And I thought, well, here's a way that I can just very quickly make life a tiny bit easier for some people. And it just seemed, as I say, like an easy way to do sort of a nice thing.
And in listening, I actually to re-prepare myself for today, I listened to your episode on the Rich Roll podcast in March of 2019, and you talk a lot about giving back to people and trying to really help people out. So I really think that kind of fits into all the things that you're usually talking about, and like the great insight that you provide, especially in writing and just finding your true self and trying to do things that get you to be really excited about what you're doing. So I hope that this interview is a little bit different than the ones you normally have, because I know I've heard you on a lot of different things, but we focus a lot on what it's like to be a ninth grader. And what the first question that we always ask every guest is to talk about your ninth grade experience. It's the name of the podcast. And we usually tell people they don't have to identify what year they graduated high school or what year they were in ninth grade, but you can if you'd like. But can you think back to your ninth grade high school experience? Where in the country were you in high school at? And what were some of the things that you were doing or thinking about in ninth grade?
Well, I can. I went, so I graduated from high school in 1984. So 1980 would have been, right, 79, 80 would have been my freshman year. And what I remember a bunch of stuff about ninth grade. I still have some friends today that I made in ninth grade. And well, I went to a Quaker school. So I went to a school that I'm not Quaker. I wasn't raised Quaker, but there was a school near where I grew up that was taught from the Quaker philosophy. My parents sent me there starting when I was in nursery school. And the big scary thing about ninth grade was you had to wear a sport coat. And I was miserable about the fact that I was going to have to wear a sport coat. And then, uh, in fact, that was, I'll be honest, I'm not going to lie to the ninth graders out there. I did not enjoy the fact that I had to wear like a jacket to school when all my friends from other places got to wear whatever they wanted.
To
I
jump in real fast,
Yeah,
when I went to a small private high school as well too, and we also had to wear a suit coat and tie every day. And to this day, I rebel against having to wear fancy clothes as
yeah,
much as
I don't do it.
possible.
I love that, Chris. I will not wear it. So yes, I will not wear ties. I won't do it because I had to do it in high school. But I'll tell you, the really huge thing that happened for me in ninth grade was I started reading a different kind of book. And I remember ninth grade is when I read Catcher in the Rye. Ninth grade is when I read Jim Carroll's book, The Basketball Diaries. Ninth grade is when I read Separate Peace. And I remember in ninth grade, suddenly the books that I was given, some of the books I was given at school, transported me into a different place inside. I found friends because sometimes in seventh and eighth grade, it wasn't always easy. Sixth, seventh, and eighth grade friendships. I would have some friendships. Sometimes they wouldn't last as long as I would hope, or our interests would diverge. But I started reading a lot in ninth grade. I was always a reader, but in ninth grade, I really started reading a lot, and I found real kinship in what I was reading. I would read a book, and then I would really think about it because I would not think about it like the way you have to in school. I would think about it because I wanted to think about it. I would suddenly kind of be lost in the book that I was reading. And that would make me curious to read other books by the people who wrote those books or to talk to someone else in school about that. And I wasn't, again, I'll be honest, and you can edit the podcast any way that you want, but I was not a great student in subjects that didn't interest me. I had a really hard time. But what happened in ninth grade is I found some things that really, really compelled me. And so I was able to begin thinking about, well, I love this whole reading thing, reading and writing. Like I love talking about books. Okay, this is something in school that I can excel at. I can understand and I can talk about this. And my high school experience was a little bit split because I never felt that way about math classes, and I would dread going to math class. And I didn't do particularly well in math class. But then I would know, okay, well, this afternoon after lunch, I have English, and there's a place where I'm going to be able to raise my hand a lot, and I'm going to be able to participate. And that meant a lot to me, you know, and then I was able to have relationships, um, something like friendships with a couple of English teachers because they were able to see that I actually really cared about what they were talking about. And so, you know, as I would get into 10th grade, 11th grade, and I would start talking about books with these teachers, or I would take more classes with those teachers. It gave me an access to a certain kind of mentorship that I really valued. Does that make sense?
Uh, yeah, absolutely. And just so you know, usually I just let the podcast just go straight through, unless you curse. Then I'd have to edit it. But other than
I'm
that,
not going to curse.
that's good. And I know it because in some of the other ones, usually language is a little bit more free flowing. But since we're a high school podcast, we kind of have to check that a little bit. But
Of
I
course.
did in the interview with Rich, you mentioned when you were a kid, you would read things over and over again because you love to learn about words, and that kind of just mirrors what you were just talking about there. You mentioned a couple of those books. Were there any other books that you remember that as you were kind of emerging into this reader, that you would kind of read over and over
Well,
again, or what you would kind of think
yeah, I
about?
remember I would read Stephen King's Night Shift over and over again. It was a short story book, and I probably came out when I was in seventh or eighth grade. But he was a grown up writing for grown ups, and I would read that book. I read that book many times. Yeah, and I would read other books. I mean, I read The Fountainhead twice or three times when I was young. Also, because I was fascinated by the character of Howard Rourke. That book is controversial now, but um, as a kid reading it, and because it's a book about someone who's very individualistic, I was taken with it. As I got a little bit older, I didn't like the message of the book as much, but that's a great thing about reading is you can engage. And I remember a teacher told me this. He said a teacher named Al Hollenbeek was his name. He was old when I was in school. He passed away a long time ago, but I remember him saying, "You might find that you don't like a book, and it's possible you're just not ready for it, or it's possible that you're not ready to have that conversation with the author that the author wants to have." And I didn't know what that meant really then, but it is true that your relationship with a book can change over time. And so Salinger's books I read over and over again. I read Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, which I didn't read in ninth grade. I think I read that book maybe in 10th grade, and then I read it freshman year of college. The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway. That's another book. The conversation you have with that book changes over time.
We talk a lot about too on our podcast is that we find that the most successful students are also doing other things outside of the classroom and kind of being involved in the school and not just going to classes and finding those things that they really excite them, but doing other things. What were some of the things that you were involved in high school, and like did
Oh
that
yeah.
start for you as a freshman, or did you kind of like wait a little bit of time to get involved with that kind of stuff?
As of no, I was in. I always auditioned for all of the school plays, and I played on two sports teams. So I was, I guess, in ninth grade, I played junior varsity basketball and varsity tennis. I played varsity tennis the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was a tennis player just growing up. I loved tennis. It was a great release for me, and and I loved basketball, and I played JV, and I was in the plays. So if I wasn't in a play, or if my role in the play wasn't great, I don't remember ninth grade if I had a really good role in the play and the music. We would do a play and a musical, one of each.
Yep,
But
that's
I
what they do
always,
here at our high school.
but I always worked on the crews too, and that's a great thing to do. So I loved working as an assistant director. My favorite teacher was a person named Jordan Hornstein, and I've named characters after him and stuff. And Jordan was an English teacher, but he was also the drama teacher and directed the plays and musicals. And I loved working closely with him. So I would be in a play, then I would be the assistant director of another play. I would um, work as just being a part of it. And I loved the experience of being, because it gave me a great sense of camaraderie. I mean, one of the things that starts to happen in high school is as you start to have these interests, you don't just make friends or meet people the ways you did earlier. You're meeting people who share an affinity that you share. So I had an affinity for the two things that I loved then. I mean, I loved music, so I was a huge record collector, which doesn't now, there's no such thing as that. I guess it's people who just spend a lot of time on Spotify or iMusic. But I um, would act in the plays, be a part of the plays, and then I played on sports teams. And those things gave me, like you're saying, a way to be involved that wasn't just scholastically, and it also put me in different peer groups. And I do think that doing things that are in quite different peer groups. So there was very little crossover in the basketball tennis team and the theater, right? Those were pretty
Yeah.
much disparate groups of people. And it would always crack me up when the guys who I played sports with would come see the play and they would be like talking in sports terms almost about the whole thing. Like, yeah, you did good up there, solid work, or whatever the thing would be, like the way they would talk about sports. And so I would try to bridge that gap. I mean, not consciously, I wasn't consciously bridging that gap. I was just doing stuff that was fascinating to me. I remember my junior year of high school, I had to make a choice because we had a show junior year of high school. We did a junior year musical that would be made entirely by the junior class. So you would pick the play, the musical, and a junior would direct it and cast it and do all that stuff. And I was picked to direct the junior musical, but that meant if I took that, I couldn't play varsity basketball. And that year I made the varsity team, but I chose to direct the musical, which at the time I didn't realize that that would make sense for my career path. I had no idea I would end up being someone who made film and television and was in the arts. I just thought that was something that was a hobby that I liked to do. But if looking back, I think it was good that I chose the musical over playing basketball. And then luckily I made the team senior year, though I wasn't a starter or anything, but I did at least get to have that experience senior year. When I quit basketball to do the junior musical, I thought it was possible I was never going to be a part of that team. And I'd always wanted to play varsity basketball. I didn't make the varsity in 10th grade, which was kind of heartbreaking. And so to make it, but then not be able to play was a really difficult decision. But I'm glad that I made the decision.
Did you ever feel any pressure or anything from like friends at school or outside influences on like having to pick one of those things, or like being torn between those kinds of worlds of like the theater and the athlete world? In that time period, I would imagine that it wasn't as um inviting or welcoming as I think it might be now, where you kind of have lots of kids doing lots of blended things, where at that point it's like the athletes were the athletes and the people in the play were the people in the play. And did you ever feel any sort of pull between those two worlds?
Well, I was probably closer friends with the play people. So yes, but I think my closer friends were the people who I would do these plays with because, you're all weekend and you're just spending so much time doing that. And it was a smaller group and it was a group that had to band together because otherwise I think we would probably get made fun of. And I think it was good that I was, someone who was able to play sports and be with those people because it would offer some measure of sort of like, I mean, protection's overstating it, but you know what I mean? It would be a decent kind of a buffer. Yeah, I mean, the basketball coach definitely wanted me to play basketball. I wasn't a star player though, so it didn't really matter to anybody in the way it mattered to me the most. And my parents were super supportive of whichever choice I made. So it was much more internal. It was much more like I really my whole life wanted to play. I took basketball much more seriously, I thought then, and I really wanted to play basketball. But something made me, Chris, you learn to listen to your instincts, not just your moods or your feelings, not just sort of like, hey, I really want to do this. But I mean, you do sort of, as you get into high school and college, start to learn to recognize the difference between an impulse and an instinct. And I had some sort of an instinct that told me, no, do the musical. Like you have the opportunity to direct this. That's a big deal. You should try to do that. And you're probably not going to go play basketball for the rest of your life. So try this thing.
Yeah,
And
it's really And it's really interesting because a lot of the appearances that you see that you do, a lot of them are sports related. Like you're on the Bill Simmons podcast a lot. I saw one of the clips was the Rich Eisen show. So you get a chance to kind of play in both worlds where, and even with a lot of the stuff you did, especially with Rounders and a lot of the movies kind of cross over into lots of different worlds. So you were able to kind of take those passions that you had,
You're so
even as a
right.
high schooler, and kind of blend them together into your career, which is kind of like an interesting question to ask. Is like, so March was supposed to be career readiness month at our high school, and as we kind of look at how you kind of establish yourself in a career, what kind of, I know this is like a really big blanket question, but like as a ninth grader or even a high schooler in general, like what advice would you have for somebody as they're maybe sitting at home now where they have all this kind of extra time, or just advice in general on how to kind of like, listen to that voice of what you're really kind of passionate about and kind of move yourself forward in that way? And how do you kind of get somebody to realize that maybe this is what I should go for?
I love thinking about this. And I don't want to give an easy or glib answer. I would say be open to changing your mind, be open to listening to the quiet voice that's your own voice, that's leading you toward what fascinates you, toward what you find compelling, toward work that makes you feel alive inside. The happiest people I've met in life, once they have the basics taken care of, I'm not telling you don't find a way to keep a roof over your head, but the happiest people I've met are people who have found a way to work from a place that makes them feel alive. There are many opportunities to work from a place that, whatever your least favorite class is, that sort of deadened feeling when you have to do that stuff. And then there's some stuff where you just feel like you're working from a place where you're tingling a little bit. And I would just be listening for those signals. And when I hear those signals, I would be chasing in that direction. But I would be open to know, okay, that's a period of life, and maybe there's something else that might take me in another direction. And I can't overstate how important reading is. Reading, learning, and reading. Reading about whatever it is that you find compelling, listening to podcasts, listening to books, continuing to just add to the depth of your knowledge for yourself, not because someone else told you to read it. It just is a path to entirely new worlds, new challenges, new ideas.
Because you even on Rich's show again, you said something like that you and your partners are good at the work you do because you're continuing to grow and you're always getting input and being obsessive about learning and this lifelong
Yes,
learning. So it's really
yes.
good, for our high school students to hear like somebody that's at almost at the pinnacle of your career, at top of profession, like shows on, movies and shows on cable, and just is doing what I assume you love to do, is always still growing and looking to learn and, better themselves. And it's not just I made it, now I'm here. It's always like, how can I keep improving? How can I keep doing better each day?
You're completely right, Chris. I want to by tomorrow, I want to know something that I don't know today. I want to feel something that I'm not necessarily feeling today. I'm always looking to grow. Uh, Bob Dylan talks about one of his most famous lines is, if you're not busy being born, you're busy dying. And what he means by that is every day you have the opportunity to become a, a better, deeper, richer version of yourself as opposed to stagnating. And so, yeah, I'm always looking for the next new bit of life and information that I can put my arms around.
One of the things I've seen in multiple spots is you talk about like finding time to pursue your passion and what does that look like? And you always talk about saving like 20 minutes a day. Like if you have 20 minutes a day that you could write like a page a day, and that route goes into like almost 3 screenplays a year.
That's right.
Can you just talk about like when did you kind of figure that out for yourself, and how did you kind of come to that, like, of just like kind of doing the work and just realizing that that's what it's going to
Sure.
take? Because I think a lot
Well,
of
I
times
had a
our high
bad.
schoolers are
Go ahead, Chris. Sorry to didn't mean to cut
No,
you
I was
off.
going to
Go
say,
ahead.
I think a lot of times our high schoolers see like successful people and they think, oh, they just somehow it just, they lucked out or they just kind of made it. But like you always talk about putting in the work. You talk about how, it didn't just happen overnight. So I think that's a good message, and kind of just hearing your story about how did you actually figure that out on your own? Because I'm sure like nobody told you like write for 20 minutes a day and that's what you need to do.
Well, a lot of that goes back to what I was sort of alluding to, which is that high school was not easy for me academically. Um, there were those English classes I that made sense to me, but a lot of stuff was hard. A lot of stuff was I would procrastinate a lot. I had a hard time sometimes getting all the work done, and I was worried later in life a little bit that that meant that I would in life not be able to do a bunch of stuff. And at a certain point, I realized if you just make steady progress a little bit at a time, you can accomplish a whole lot. And so I read a book called The Artist's Way by someone named Julia Cameron. And this book talked about something called morning pages, where you do 3 longhand written pages in the morning. You just kind of keep your pen moving. And that doing that started me on spending a half hour a day or 20 to minutes to a half hour a day writing. And I realized, yeah, in a half hour, you can write a page. Let's say you do 6 days a week. So take Sundays out of it. That's 52 Sundays. So 365 minus 52 is some number. That's the number of days, like 318, right? 317, 317. That's the number. You have 317 pages written. And 313,
Yeah,
sorry,
313.
313. You could have 313 pages written. And so, like, that's 1 page a day in a year. 313 pages is a novel. It's a nonfiction book. It's 3 screenplays. It's 10 short stories. Like, there's so much stuff that you can do in what's a short period of time. Once I realized that, I was like, well, okay, I can find a way to gain momentum. Momentum. Look, your students are going to be in science class, and you can explain this because you're a science teacher. Chris, could you just very quickly explain the term inertia and the term momentum for the people listening?
Inertia is when things are not moving, and momentum is when things begin to move. They gather some movement, and then the movement keeps rolling, and then that's as we kind of
Right.
move down.
And they're sort of oppositional forces in a way, right? Inertia and momentum.
Yes, inertia is when they're always pushing and pulling on each other.
Right. So inertia is the sort of stopping, and momentum is the going, and each can be a very powerful force. And the more, uh, and each can become sort of a trend. And so I want to avoid inertia. And the way I have found to avoid inertia is by generating momentum. If momentum is going, you can't have inertia. So I want to try and keep momentum going and to keep inertia in abeyance, if I can just use a word that people can go look up. And another key in life, a huge thing, if I could say to ninth graders, not for your SATs. I don't care about your SATs. When you hear a word that you don't know, make it a practice to write it down, look it up, and use it 3 times the next day. I cannot tell you how much your life improves. It improves exponentially with each new word you add. Each new word you add to your vocabulary is an entire world. It's a world. You don't know that right away, but each word is a world, and it leads you into incredibly new places and with incredible amounts of depth. When you hear the name of a movie you haven't seen, an old record album, music you haven't heard, a word you don't know, write that stuff down, catalog it, chase it down, see what compels you about it. Words are power. The ability to use words to communicate exactly what you're thinking and feeling, to understand exactly what you're thinking and feeling. Words unlock worlds. And So I don't think there's anything more important I could say than you're at a point where your brains have an incredible ability to learn. There's an incredible amount of plasticity in your brains where you can learn, especially when you're interested in learning. And if you understand the why and the reason you want to know words is, well, a few things. One, nothing makes you look smarter more quickly than an expanded vocabulary. Two, it lets you understand yourself because you will have feelings and thoughts, and suddenly these words will give them names and will lead you into other ways to explore them. Every time you learn a new word, it allows you to follow a path to 10 more new words. So, if I could leave you with one thing, it's that when you hear a word you don't know, don't worry about looking goofy. Quickly jot it down on your phone, look it up, and then use it 3 times in a sentence the next day. And then that word will be yours forever.
And I think that's a really great thing to remind kids, is because a lot of times when they hear things they don't know, they just kind of want to skip over it. They don't put the thought into it.
Correct.
But, if you don't do that kind of stuff, then you really don't learn and you don't kind of grow. And I think your whole story, and we're only going to talk for a minute or two more here, but, if people want to check out your entire story, you're all over the internet, you're all over podcasts, you're all over everywhere. You can find out your entire story. But I think your story is just one of growth. You're always looking to grow and expand and push your thoughts and kind of move yourself forward. And I think in your whole career arc, it seems like that's what you've always been doing. You've always tried to push yourself forward. You've always tried to not define yourself by what you've done, by what you're doing next. So I think that's a great message for students to kind of hear there at the end is, like I said earlier, like we have this super successful professional in an entertainment business, which is cutthroat as it is. And you never want to rest. You always want to move. You always want to push forward. You always want to continue to grow and to learn. So I really appreciate you taking the time here today to kind of give our students a great message. Hopefully they hear it, and the parents at home can hear it too, that, you kind of tell people like the real story, and you kind of can give them the real impression of how to be successful and kind of where you came from and those kinds of things as well too.
Chris,
So anything,
totally my pleasure. And if anyone has questions that you didn't ask, I think you did an amazing job asking questions. This was a total pleasure. I'm on Twitter at Brian Koppelman. I often answer questions, and I will spread the word about this when it's put up. And I'm really glad you took the chance of reaching out to me, Chris.
No, I really appreciate it. And thank you very much. And, like you said, and also you have the moment with Brian Koppelman, your podcast as well, too, where you talk to people about the things that they do in order to be successful and kind of their backstories as well, too. So, Brian, thanks so much for taking the time. And, hopefully our ninth graders get a whole lot out of this. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Be well.
Thank you.